It's been said that history repeats itself. The unassuming, safe community of Bradley, Illinois seemed to be a carefree haven for families, with kids playing tag and riding their bikes until the streetlights came on. But in 1981, when a shocking crime upended the community, residents of the village spent years trying to recover. But little did they know that evil would strike twice. This is the case of Tara Sue Huffman and Christopher Meyer. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 23 of Crime Cave. I'm Christy, and when I say this case hits close to home, I mean that literally. 1 mile from home, actually. The first part of this case takes place in Bradley, Illinois, where I grew up. It's about an hour south of Chicago, and I spent the first 25 years of my life there. My dad was on the Bradley Fire Department, which shared the same building as the police department, and whenever he was at home, he would have his scanner sitting right next to him. Still does, by the way. So he always knew what was going on. Every single person I knew back then had some sort of a connection to this. Tara Sue attended Bradley East School, and I attended Bradley Central about a half mile away. Then, years later, I would end up working in the same office as Christopher Meyer's mom, Micah Moulton, the very summer that crime occurred. The horror of these tragedies hit our community like a ton of bricks. I recently came across an interview with one of Tara's older brothers from 2018, and he said, in 1981, nobody ever heard of anything happening to a kid back then. So it's like it wasn't part of your vocabulary. You couldn't pronounce that. It just didn't happen. But, of course, it did happen. And it's an experience that's been ingrained in every single person I know that grew up there. So there was absolutely zero doubt that I would eventually cover this story. But most importantly, I hope it sheds some light on the lives and the personalities of these two incredible little kids. So let's get to know Tara Sue Huffman and Christopher Meyer. Tara Sue Huffman was born August 14, 1975, to parents Barbara and Charles Huffman in Bradley, Illinois, which was located in Kankakee County. She was the youngest of 8 children, with 4 sisters and 3 brothers, some of them being 20 years older than her. With her parents having her in their early 40s, Tara was well aware that she was the late arrival to the family and seemed to understand the fact that she would always be their baby. Tara had nicknames for her parents. She wouldn't just call them Mom and Dad. She would say, "Hey, my mom. Hey, my dad." Tara loved infants, whether they were her friends' siblings or her many nieces and nephews. Whenever she spotted a baby, she was known to walk right up and plant a kiss in the middle of their forehead. Even at 5 years old, she liked to take on a little mother role. Tara was described as a robust kid who never missed a day of school and wasn't afraid of frogs or snakes. In fact, she would snatch them up so she could take care of them, and she loved to run around the neighborhood barefoot. On May 21, 1981, Tara was attending morning kindergarten at Bradley East Elementary School. As a reward for perfect attendance, she was part of a group that was treated to an outing at the local roller rink called the Skating Place, which was pretty much where all of us Bradley kids spent our Saturdays. She enjoyed a hot dog and a Pepsi while she waited for the bus to come pick her up to take her back to school. It was a beautiful sunny day in the mid-80s, really the first warm day of the year, but she reluctantly had to go along with her mom and a family friend to several yard sales before finally going home and changing into her summer wear and making the rounds. She was tearing off her school clothes the minute she got in the door and quickly changed into a pair of shorts and a white t-shirt. "I'm going to Smith's, my mom. Love ya." And she bounded out the screen door and down the alleyway to visit with friends. Tara's brother Richard had found a little painted turtle and put it in the back of his truck, planning to give it to Tara as a pet. He stopped by the house at 1:30 and asked his mom where Tara was. That prompted Barb to start checking with neighbors on her daughter's current whereabouts. After multiple replies of, "We haven't seen her," Barb started to get worried. She began walking up and down the alley, knocking on doors, and after making the rounds twice with still no sighting of Tara, panic started to set in. Tara's father, Charles, was at home in a cast due to a work injury, so he reluctantly stayed by the phone while he watched his family fan out around the neighborhood. Tara was officially reported missing at 5 p.m. Many people thought she was going to turn up. She's probably at a friend's house and fell asleep in the backyard, because nothing bad ever happens in Bradley. But Richard noticed a young teenage boy sitting on the porch with an odd expression, and he wondered, who is that kid? And why is he looking at me like that? The 6x6 block radius of East Bradley absolutely sprung into action. Word spread fast. Now, I was a kid myself in the central part of Bradley, and even I knew what was going on. For hours, people who earlier that day had never heard the name Tara Sue Huffman were canvassing the area on foot, by car, pickup truck, bike, and four-wheeler, searching for the missing 5-year-old girl. But after 5 hours of searching, that odd young teen had declared, "I found her!" Lieutenant Steve Hammond approached the boy, and what he saw at that moment would haunt him for the rest of his life. The boy emerged from a concealed dump site, clumsily carrying the tiny, stiff body of Tara Sue Huffman under her arms. One of her eyes was swollen shut. The other was half open, seeing nothing. She was nude except for her white t-shirt that was pulled up, and a tree branch was protruding from between her legs. An autopsy would later reveal that she had been sexually assaulted with a stick, and the cause of death was a skull fracture. Police broke the unfathomable news to Tara's family, her sister collapsing in the street, and the teen boy was accompanied to the Bradley Police Department by his father to be questioned. His name was Timothy Buss, and he was 13 years old. Juvenile officer Kathy Bergen interviewed him gingerly, understanding that this was a horrendously traumatic event for anyone, let alone a 13-year-old boy. After a while, they took a break, and the deputy coroner, Mary Rivard, stated she had an odd feeling. Lieutenant Hammond encouraged her to go on, and she said, "It's just that in all my years investigating deaths, it's very, very strange to have someone pick up a corpse." We're going to fast forward 8 months, and suffice it to say, that interview didn't go well. Timothy Buss was convicted of murder on January 22, 1982, and was sentenced to 25 years in prison. At that time, he was 14 years old. But Tim was not a model prisoner. He attempted to cut himself and was put on watch, ultimately in hopes of getting out early. He managed to conceal a 25-pound weight in his cell that he used to try to break a hole in the wall and escape 4 different times. And while in prison, he bragged about Tara's murder. But still, Timothy's grandmother petitioned for an early release. She showed up at a Bradley craft store and asked the owner to sign it, presenting it with Tim's grades, and said, "Does someone like this belong in jail?" The owner of the craft shop didn't sign it, later expressing amazement that the fact her grandson managed to cobble together a couple of C grades in school was more important than what he did to Tara Sue Huffman. Timothy spent 7 years in a juvenile facility before moving to adult incarceration. Now, I'm going to inject a little personal story here. It was around mid-1994, and I was visiting my sister, who happened to live in East Bradley. I was spending some time with my beloved nephew, who was 1 year old at the time. And suddenly my sister says to me, "Guess whose family lives across the street?" Without hesitation, I immediately said, "Timothy Buss." And she said, "Yep. Can you believe that?" Now, being the admittedly overprotective aunt that I was, the conversation went along the line of, "Oh my God, can you imagine if they ever let him out? We'd have to take care of him ourselves." Little did we know, he was already out. Despite multiple escape attempts, he was released a year earlier after serving only 12 and a half years and had been roaming the streets for 12 months. By that time, he was 26 years old. Nobody knew. Nobody in our community had any idea he was out. In the summer of 1995, 10-year-old Christopher Meyer was enjoying a couple of months at his mom's house in the small riverside town of Aroma Park, Illinois. Born January 5, 1985, to Jim Meyer and Micah Moulton, he spent some time in California before splitting his time between his dad's home in Walla Walla, Washington, and his mom's house in Illinois. Chris was a true blue, all-American kid, a combination of innocence, energy, and imagination. A blonde, blue-eyed boy with unforgettable dimples. He had already taken a big gulp of life by the time he was 10. He had learned to speak German when his dad was stationed overseas as a U.S. military pilot. He had an affection for wildlife, which turned up in sketches he gave as gifts. He loved riding roller coasters, always opting for the front car. Chris was getting ready to enter the 5th grade at Walla Walla Sharpstein Elementary School, where he won a science prize for showing how electricity worked in a house. He was fascinated with the future and already had career ideas, being a firefighter, a pilot, or maybe a professional fisherman. Like most kids, he loved riding his bike and hanging out with friends, but nothing seemed to make him happier than landing a glistening trout in the waters of Washington State. He and his friends spent hours reeling in a fish, then throwing them back. He once even tried to teach his dog Dingo to fish by attaching a fishing line to his collar and putting bait at the end. He actually caught a fish that way once. Chris dealt with asthma and would develop a severe reaction to anything with eggs, including cakes and cookies. He was diligent about staying away from those things and subsequently learned to read food labels. On his birthdays, his special treat was apple pie with lots of whipped cream, candles, and ice cream. He and his mom would bake the pie together. Monday, August 7th, 1995, was an incredibly hot and muggy, but typical day. Chris had asked Micah if he and his brother could go with the rest of the kids about 4 blocks away to the Kankakee Riverbank to go fishing. It was a little after 1, and Micah told him to be back by 5. Off he rode on his royal blue bike, wearing his blue shorts, green patterned t-shirt, and Chicago Blackhawks tennis shoes, excited to spend his afternoon sitting by the river with his fishing pole. When 5 p.m. rolled around and Chris wasn't back yet, Micah was initially frustrated. He knows he's supposed to be home on time. He's usually a well-mannered young boy who respected what his mom said. But as Micah busied herself in the kitchen, she glanced up at the clock on the stove and noticed it read 5:22. And she suddenly had a horrible feeling in the pit of her stomach. Micah would say that being a mom was filled with lots of moments of worry, 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 everything's fine. Worry, 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 everything's fine. So she tried to rationalize that this was one of those times. She retraced his steps and looked everywhere she thought he could be. But the worry was starting to take over. This was so unlike him. For a moment, she thought maybe the extreme heat and humidity spurred on an asthma attack and he lost his inhaler. She continued to look for him, but when the sun started to go down, she made the gut-wrenching decision to call police. Detective Jo Lynn Mulcahy was the sergeant in investigations, and she soon became the trusted liaison between the family and the authorities. Micah said she would look out her picture window and imagine him coming up the driveway with his bike, all dirty and muddy, with a look on his face like, "I am in so much trouble now." But the family spent a slow, agonizing night with no word from Chris. The next day, Micah received a call from the police department. A royal blue bike was found in some undergrowth, and a boy's red and black tennis shoe was found in the river. Micah identified both as belonging to Chris. The following day, on August 9th, Chris's other shoe was found floating in the river. By August 12th, searchers found pieces of Christopher's clothing in the area around the gravel parking lot for Hunting Area 10 in the Kankakee State Park. On a path leading from the parking lot, there was a piece of Chris's t-shirt on the ground, and a pair of Ninja Turtle underwear hanging in a nearby bush. Police questioned anyone who was at the boat launch on the day Christopher disappeared. A witness stated they saw Christopher talking to a man at the riverbank. A composite sketch was created and released to the public. Police soon received a call from a local resident who stated he thinks he knows who this person is. The caller was Richard Huffman, Tara Sue Huffman's older brother. And he said, "I think it's Timothy Buss, but I thought he was still in prison." Tara's brother, mother, and a few other family members went to Aroma Park to visit with Micah, but she didn't understand why they were there. Micah didn't live in the community in the early 80s when Tara was murdered. She wondered, why are these people here? Christopher's not dead, he's still alive. Once Timothy Buss's name was brought up, everybody knew but Micah. At that point, she still had a lot of hope. But when everyone else heard that name, no one else did. On August 15th, 1995, Christopher's body was found in a shallow grave deep in the Kankakee State Park. He had been stabbed 48 times and sexually mutilated. He had numerous defensive wounds on the inside of his hands. Unbelievably, Timothy Buss was actually found down at the crime scene, fishing by the river, and he was brought in for questioning. He immediately claimed that the murder was actually committed by another man who looked like him and drove the same kind of car. However, Christopher's hair and blood was found in the back of his vehicle, and a pair of boots that he tried to ditch at the Braidwood Motel where he was staying matched a print by the shallow grave. Hundreds of people attended Christopher's funeral, and during the procession, construction workers stopped and put their hard hats over their hearts. The trial for Timothy Buss took place the summer of 1996, and it should be noted that Tara's brother attended. Timothy Buss was found guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and aggravated unlawful restraint. He was sentenced to death on July 6, 1996. However, in typical Illinois political fashion, Governor George Ryan commuted all death sentences in Illinois 2 days before he left office in 2003. He is currently at the Menard Correctional Facility in southern Illinois. Micah commented, "He doesn't have to pay rent, he doesn't have to worry about where his next meal is going to come from or whether his bills are going to be paid. Granted, he has to live in a prison, but the prison I'm living in and my family's been living in is a hell of a lot worse." Micah was able to create something positive out of this. In 1997, she founded Christopher's Clubhouse, a comprehensive safety education organization, helping to teach kids how to defend themselves from an attacker. She chose that name because Chris had always wanted his own clubhouse. Additionally, the murders of Tara Sue and Christopher prompted a re-examination of the way convicted sex offenders have to register when moving into new areas. And now for today's listener question. Okay, today's question is from Diane, and she wants to know, what does the inside of the crime cave look like? Actually, I will post a photo of the crime cave on Facebook and my Instagram page. But if I were to sit here and describe it to you, it's a lot of ambient lighting, which I've always liked anyway. But I have a red lava lamp. I have one small desk lamp that I use to record by, and that's it in regards to lighting. I do have some happy things in here, too. I'm prone to having smiley faces around. And I have several pictures of my favorite singer, Chris Cornell, and my nephew, and some fun stuff in here, too. But yeah, it's pretty dark and spooky in here, but I like it that way. Thanks for your question, Diane.
Hey, everybody, it's Ray the Roadie.
And this is Hollywood Mike
with the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast, coming to you from the Illinois Rock and Roll Museum on Route 66 in Joliet, Illinois.
Where once a week we are interviewing local musicians and singer-songwriters, and the podcast itself covers a wide range of topics, including, but not limited to, the history of rock and roll in Chicago, the current state of the scene, and the challenges and opportunities facing musicians today.
So join us every Tuesday for a new exciting episode of the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.
Thanks for joining me. This episode of Crime Cave has been brought to you by Fortress Defense Consultants, providing security consulting for educational institutions, corporate facilities, and houses of worship, as well as pepper spray, situational awareness, and defensive firearms training for police and private citizens. Find Fortress on the web at fortressdefense.com. Contact Fortress directly at 708-522-8060 or email them at info@fortressdefense.com. Avoid being the subject of a future episode of Crime Cave. Train with Fortress today. Until next time.